There is almost a consensus amongst service providers that monthly Microsoft SPLA licensing costs are a given, a necessary evil, or in a more mature language, a natural cost of doing business. You can do nothing about them. And most service providers we engaged with for the first time never considered that SPLA costs could be reduced without damaging their business, changing a lot in the infrastructure and the services they provide. However, as our years of experience demonstrated, cost reduction is possible and the results can reach 30% and beyond. Hello, our dear friends and followers, and those who are here for the first time. Welcome to our regular live event dedicated to cloud and hosting providers, as we often do on this channel. I'm your host, Alexander Golev, Head of Consulting and Services at SAMexpert. As you can see, that there are logos here and the QR code you can use to go to our website. And today in the studio, I have my business partner, Daryl Ullman, who's our negotiations lead. You may be asking why listen to us. So let's take that off the desk quickly. We hope that you can benefit from our experience working with over 100 providers over the course of 10 plus years and saving hundreds of millions in various Microsoft-related costs. That's what we do. We are Microsoft cost-dedicated consultancy. And it's very important to say, I think it's our benefit, that we are not a Microsoft partner. And that is a deliberate decision, so we can provide unbiased help and unbiased advice. And before sharing our proven recipes, which we will, which is why we're here today, I want to begin with the story of two hosting providers to set the scene. The first provider did not pursue cost savings at all. We were supporting them in a Microsoft SPLA compliance audit. And an integral part of any good audit defense process, we defend against an audit, is the analysis of the infrastructure and the types and nature of services. Always. This is where we start. And during that analysis, which goes quite deeply into how servers are run, how virtual machines are spread across different environments, we almost always find inefficiencies. Always find inefficiencies and opportunities to reduce licensing costs. And the discoveries lead to questions and discussions, because obviously when we see something is inefficient, why don't I ask the provider, like, why did you decide to configure it this way? And sometimes, as a result of these conversations, providers take action themselves, which is exactly what happened with this provider in this case. And a year after the audit that they passed with nearly negligible penalties, I must chip that in, we had a call with that team, who are now our very good friends. We had some nice dinners with them. I went to Europe to meet with them. Nice, good friends. And what they told us is, they basically said, Alex, by the way, I have good news for you. We reduced our SPLA cost by 30%. And obviously I asked them why. And they said, we took notes, we simply followed all your suggestions that you made during the audit. On the other hand, there's another story. There was a provider that approached us specifically asking if we could help them reduce licensing costs. So they came with the aim to decrease the amount of money they pay to Microsoft from the SPLA infrastructure. And unfortunately, they had the wrong expectations even before the first meeting. So the project hit a dead end and we decided to withdraw. And let me explain you why this happened. So cost savings in SPLA require rolling up your sleeves and being ready to change. It usually requires architectural changes that may upset certain people, upset the IT team that invested their truly valuable time. There's no sarcasm here. Truly valuable time and resources in planning, researching, building a perfect infrastructure, developing infrastructure management tools or buying infrastructure management tools. Sales teams may have to update their process and practices. That's easy though. That's easier. And legal might need to review the contracts. That also affects costs, funny enough. So regardless of that, cost optimization still, including regular cleanups, mostly falls on the IT team's shoulders. So the bottom line of this is you must be ready to roll up your sleeves and do significant work. Very little can be achieved without disrupting the status quo. And in addition, if you work with any of us or any other consultancy, we need to see all the relevant data in order to help down to tiny detail. You want us to help you. Give us the data that we ask you to give us. There's a reason why we're asking for it. And the problems with this second story began when we all realized we won't have enough visibility of their cloud infrastructure and billing and reporting processes. Is it possible to provide generic advice? Absolutely. This is why we're here today. We're going to actually today share our working recipes with you. Otherwise, we will be just wasting your time, and you would be wasting your time on this live. However, our experience proved that when there's an obvious one-way approach from the start, there's usually a lack of motivation, lack of authorization. Somebody is not authorized to provide the data, and just there's lack of general desire to proceed with the improvements to reap the tangible benefits. Such projects simply fail. Daniel, do you want to add anything on this point?
I think that the number one reason, and you touched on it, why it's not only about the projects failing or the audits failing or the cost savings failing, it's about, I would almost say, understanding of what affects SPLA licensing. There are at times a disconnect between the people or the individuals, professionals that are managing the environment and the understanding of what's driving costs and how costs are driven and what are the responsibilities. And ultimately, that is the disconnect between them and management and who has authorization to drive what initiative. And at other times, there's a almost natural defense mechanism that happens where you get a bit apprehensive of sharing information from the pure perspective of, oh, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe they're going to find me out. Maybe I'm in the wrong. What will my superiors say? Ultimately, we are part of the team. We become an integral, almost intimate part of the team, where our position is purely to make you shine, to make you as a professional shine. We don't we come without an ego. So we're not there to point fingers. It's about education, it's about enhancing knowledge, and ultimately, um, to drive a better business result. So we're part of the team. Share whatever you provide us with, we'll be able to bring more value. With any consultant, again, we're talking about SAMexpert, but when you bring in a consultant or a third party company, if you don't trust them, don't bring them in. That's the bottom line.
And that is the bottom line for everything about cost savings in SPLA, because this is what we see. You need to understand them from the get-go, that if you want to achieve results, you need to be ready to do the hard work. Results are possible. It's absolutely possible to pay less for SPLA. There's another note on this, because sometimes we hear, you know what, I'll take it closer to the end, but the point that I want to make is sometimes we hear, why will we optimize the costs if we can recover that from our clients? But we'll get to that. We'll get to that point. So I'll proceed with the recipes of how you can start optimizing costs. And these recipes are some of the recipes that we use. It's not a comprehensive list. It's not everything, but things that are, you think they're on the surface. And when I'll tell you them, you will probably also think, why haven't we thought about it? And they're very easy to implement from just general understanding point of view, but there may be political and infrastructural obstacles that you will have to overcome. That's why I'm saying you need to be ready to roll up your sleeves and put in work, and then reap the benefits. And what I want to begin with right now is to give a quick high-level picture for those who have a limited understanding of how SPLA licensing works, because we may have CFOs on this watching this video, procurement people watching this video. So let me give you a very short introduction into how SPLA licensing works. So at the end of every calendar month, as a service provider with a Microsoft SPLA agreement, you're supposed to calculate how many licenses your clients consumed altogether, submit a report to your SPLA reseller, and then pay for that consumption. And the money ultimately goes to Microsoft. That's a monthly process. Importantly, how you recover those costs from your end clients is entirely your internal matter. Moreover, you're actually not supposed to resell them licenses. So we strongly discourage our clients from including exact licenses and license SKUs in their monthly bills. Because you're not supposed to resell licenses. You're supposed to provide them services, hosting services, database services, application services. That's what you're licensed to do. And whether you are an infrastructure as a service cloud provider, IaaS provider, we have a public cloud, we host our clients, or you are a SaaS company hosting your own, say, accounting solution or a solution for American health services, the process of that reporting is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. It doesn't differ. And what do you pay for? So let me explain again to those who are not aware. So what do you pay for in general? Mostly operating systems, Windows Server only. This is the key. Windows Server only, sometimes combined with System Center, which is an IT management software. Point number 2, database software, SQL Server, another big part of the SPLA expenses on a monthly basis. And the third massive chunk of SPLA expenses are user-based licenses, which include remote desktop, remote access, terminal service, and what's installed in those remote service, Microsoft Office and sometimes Visual Studio. So I will begin with software-related optimization recipes, just going through the same list. But please stay with us, as there are also other cost mitigation opportunities granted to you by the terms of the SPLA agreement itself. And surprise, surprise, SPLA, that very rarely anybody reads, has terms that give you exceptions that can help you reduce your costs. And most of the service providers we talk are, for the first time at least, are unaware of those, which is a shame. So, Windows Server, and everybody has Windows Server, even those who say we only provide operating systems. Consolidate and segregate. This is the first thing you need to consider. Most providers have a mix of operating systems and the cloud infrastructure. This is what we see. You have lots of hosts, many clusters, and there's a mix of Windows Server, Windows 11, and various flavors of Linux. And in some cases, Windows Server could be 20%. We've seen cases when it's only 20% of the estate. And it's spread like butter across the entire estate. The solution here is, it just lies on the surface. You don't have to be a super expert to understand it. Consolidate servers on a number of hosts, Windows Server, production Windows Server machines, and move everything else to the rest of the infrastructure. It may be difficult from the point of view of the architecture. It may be difficult if you have one tool that just sees it as one single bubble, hyper-converged, whatever other fancy terms you can think of. But just ask yourselves, do you want to pay for 100 hosts multiplied by 62 cores, multiplied by $33 per month, or just do that consolidation and only pay for 20 hosts instead? This alone could reduce your costs. I wouldn't say by 80%, because there are other pieces of software and things to consider. But 30 to 50% could be achieved just by doing that, depending on the density of Windows Server machines. Start with that. This is our first recipe that we're sharing with you. Start with that. Think of that.
Sasha, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Just on the first recipe. Okay, I understand that this is time consuming. Nobody's got time to go back and optimize. Everybody's running forward. Customer requirements, new tech, AI is coming out, and everybody's rushing and running. it's time consuming. Why don't I just wait for an audit? This is about risk mitigation. Why don't I just wait for an audit? When the audit happens, I've got two options. One, maybe I've got time to go through that optimization prior to actually start running scripts. That's one option. I've got a small window, maybe it's enough. And the second option is, won't Microsoft provide me with a concession saying that, oh, well, this is your gap, and if you promise to consolidate, we'll reduce the gap to the new infrastructure configuration. Have you seen that happen?
That will never, ever, ever, ever happen. And you can get concessions on other products. Windows Server that's impossible. Even, which by the way, even when you overpay sometimes by mistake for Windows Server, it's almost nearly impossible to ask Microsoft to pay that money back, return it after 60 days. You only have 60 days basically to correct yourself. And imagine during the audit you realize you've been overpaying all these years and it could have been done differently. And even if you correct it during the audit and move those machines, well, let's be honest, some do. Just to a limited number of hosts, and then you just say, "Oh, I've overpaid." You won't get that money back, and it's a wasted money. It's huge. Windows Server, depending on what services you provide, could be 100% of all your SPLA costs, or it could be 20% of your SPLA costs. It's still a large number on your bill, on a monthly bill. We're talking about like average size provider. I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars just on that. That accumulates over the years. More, if we're talking about huge providers, that's hundreds of thousands, 200,000-300,000 a month. I've seen that. And I don't want to alienate IT professionals here. No way. I'm an ex-sysadmin, so I'm on your side. And I understand that somebody comes and says, you need to change your entire architecture because you didn't think about licensing implications. And nobody thinks about licensing. Very few think about licensing implications. It's upsetting. You've invested yourself in it. You maybe bought a tool that controls your cloud that does not let you isolate Windows Server. And by the way, Windows 11 should not be on this machine either because it's not licensed through SPLA. So just pack as many Windows Server machines in a single cluster. Just do that. It reaps benefits. And they're immediate. The beauty of SPLA and the danger of SPLA is that it's a monthly consumption agreement. Every improvement pays back next month immediately like this. But everything that's delayed accumulates.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that?
Yes.
It comes to mind. I'm sure there are people listening to this and saying, SPLA licensing, Windows Server licensing is a thing of the past. We're moving to the cloud, Azure. Why should I even invest? The end is coming. What do you say to people that have that mindset of architecture change, optimization? It's a thing of the past. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not a simple question to answer. Thank you for that, by the way. It's not. I'll answer simply. It depends on your strategy. If you think that your company, your your service provider business is going to be in Azure in a year's time, if there's no quick win on reorganizing your existing infrastructure, you may completely skip it because, well, you'll be in Azure tomorrow. There is a chance that consumption models will be allowed on service providers, Azure-based Windows Server with Azure Arc. It's not now allowed, permitted on service providers, but some things
similar to SQL Arc that we're seeing in enterprise customers.
Yes, you can use it on premises now. You can pay for Windows Server through Azure. So this is an interesting flip that Microsoft did. They basically took on-premises software, which didn't disappear, but the costs are now going to the Azure bucket. It goes through Azure. So you still have your on-premises or hosted machines with SQL Server and can be hosted. They can be hosted, but the money goes not through the SPLA channel, not through the volume licensing channels, but Microsoft receives that money through Azure, which also helps them with the rising share price, because they now can show the market that Azure adoption is growing whilst it's still on premise. But let's
But
not go.
then that won't potentially provide pure cost optimization. Just say Windows Arc or Windows Azure Arc, or I don't know what it's going to be called exactly. It still requires optimization of your infrastructure. So
Yeah,
if you're not planning, if I take what you're saying that, okay, if you're planning the next 12 months, you've got a roadmap. 12 months from now, you're going to be on Azure, on AWS, or I don't know where you're going to be, but not on prem. That's fine. Start planning, but you also need to plan your infrastructure there well, because there are costs in Azure as well that need to be looked at. But if that's not on your roadmap, it doesn't matter what licensing scheme is going to come out. You still need to start thinking about cost optimization, because cloud actually might not save you money. It's the way that you think that you're going to be setting up your infrastructure. Would that be a good summary of what you said?
it would be. It would be. I wouldn't entirely dismiss optimization and SPLA, and then every man for themselves in this
So
regard.
you're also saying that on-premise usage of Windows Server is still going to be around for many years to come. It's not a thing of the
Yeah,
past.
yeah. And the same with providers. Some may be benefiting from moving to Azure. I know lots of providers, especially in Europe, by the way, especially with what's going on right now geopolitically. They want to keep that business, their own data centers. They invested in. I've been to a data center in Alps that was built inside a mountain. So imagine that provider invested in all of this, building it, electrifying it, thinking about air conditioning and whatever else
Yeah, all the
providers need to think of.
infrastructure,
And then
wiring.
suddenly, what, they will move tomorrow to Azure? I doubt it. It's a long-term
All of those
investment.
skeptics out there, and I'm pushing this and I'm going to stop now because you've got quite a few other topics to cover. All those skeptics that are saying, don't optimize, it's a thing of the past, cloud is everything. Stop a second and think what you actually need. And maybe you might be even looking at bringing stuff back from the cloud to your local on-prem installation due to geopolitical changes in the market, or everything's happening between the US and Europe. So it's still a bit of old school licensing, old school infrastructure, because everybody likes hype, but there's still a lot of money there, and you've got a business to run. So it's worthwhile investing time looking into that.
We need to understand the massive difference between the two worlds. One is end clients. End clients are, with all the talk about repatriation and repatriation actually happening, the majority of end clients are increasing their cloud presence. But it's not necessarily Azure presence, just cloud presence. It could be cloud bought from a European provider, like, I don't know, with OVH or Data Cloud, whatever, European providers. And the world doesn't revolve around hyperscalers, fortunately. Those on-premise clients, when you look at the budgets, Microsoft budgets, you see that on-premise is shrinking. It doesn't mean that they're not using Windows Server and SQL Server. And it doesn't mean they don't consume it from a SPLA provider. That's the second world. SPLA providers. SPLA providers still exist in the reality of traditional licensing. It's the traditional SPLA licensing, but that's traditional licensing. We're still talking about not cloud resources, but for the providers, but service, databases, user software. There's much more in the providers' world that will remain for many years to come, more or less, after almost completely disappearing from the side of the end clients. So and there's another thing I want to chip in. When you mentioned that you hear those claims that everything will be in the cloud, forget about traditional licensing, don't optimize. If you feel like the call is too enthusiastic, look up whom they're working for and what their role is, and think about what are they rewarded for. It's like with the massive danger of alienating people that are fanatical about AI these days. It's like when you say anything critical about AI on YouTube or TikTok, you get lots of dislikes from the people that their livelihood is depending on AI. They invested their lives into promoting AI, and now you're saying something negative about it, whether that's objective or not. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And when you hear somebody saying, forget about optimization, maybe they have an agenda. Just think about that. That's.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sasha. Yeah.
So secondly, about Windows Server, I want to go back to Windows Server recipes, which by the way, our provider number one did. Windows Server is licensed per physical core. So you naturally pay for physical cores, physical processes in physical servers. This is how Windows Server is licensed in SPLA. So naturally, you may consider, can I run more virtual machines and maybe reduce the number of cores? So next time you do a hardware refresh, think about that. Think about, can I buy taller servers? I call them taller servers with more memory and accommodate more virtual machines as much as performance permits, and maybe consider processes that they don't necessarily have 256 cores. Don't go for AMD. Windows Server costs will be incredibly high. Go with maybe more performant but fewer cores processors, if you understand what I mean, and increase the density of virtual machines. When you invest in new hardware, opt for tall servers. That's the bottom line. With a lot of RAM, but fewer cores. Yes, it's a much more complicated measure. You must consider deeply technical nuances, such as over-provisioning of cores. This is a very highly technical term. Ask your admins, they know. And performance implications, because you may not be able to actually host 100 VMs because they will be competing for the resources. So you need to strike the right balance. However, as we know of actual cases, more than one, where it has been done and cost reductions have been achieved, this is the thing we suggest considering. Don't necessarily go and now sell your existing service and buy new ones, but at the next hardware refresh, think about that. The more cores you have, the fewer memory modules you have in your service, the more you're going to pay for SPLA. And the opposite is true as well. Then an obvious thing, purely from the licensing standpoint, but for some reason, sometimes it's overlooked. Not always, but sometimes it's overlooked. If you use extensively System Center, don't report Windows Server and System Center as separate line items. Core Infrastructure Suite is a bundle that includes both, and it's discounted compared to two separate licenses. Small thing. No infrastructure redesign required. Just check your reporting practices, really. Next, I want to move to SQL Server. So with SQL Server, it's a bit different. Well, it's not a bit different. It's a lot different. Because I've just spoken about consolidating Windows servers in dedicated clusters. So to many, consolidating SQL servers comes to mind, but we would not, as a team, recommend it as the first step. It shouldn't be a first step. It rarely bears fruit. Unless you run your own SaaS and you have 100% control over the design, how you build it. So we're not talking about end client virtual machines here. When you have full control of the architecture, then you can think about consolidating SQL servers. So if you want to pursue that route, there is an option for unlimited virtualization, as it's called, when you license the host and then you run as many virtual machines with SQL Server on those hosts. But to make it worthwhile, you need to pack as many active production SQL Server virtual machines, as many as possible, on the single server or on a tiny dedicated cluster dedicated to SQL Server production instances. It's difficult. It's difficult. It's rarely achievable. It is achievable, but you need to do more calculation than purely licensing. You need to account for performance and resilience considerations as well. But it may be achieved. What I would start with is rather control what SQL Server editions are deployed. And I'm not even talking about deploying SQL Server Enterprise by mistake. I'll get back to that. Or maybe I should mention it now. We see cases when SQL Server Enterprise is deployed by mistake. And the reason for that is Microsoft provides one binary with all the editions in it, and sysadmins, if they're not instructed clearly what needs to be installed, install Enterprise by default because that's the best edition. But it's also the most expensive one. It costs 4 times the cost of SQL Server Standard. And it accumulates. It's the most expensive license in SPLA. The second one is Visual Studio. So I usually used to say Visual Studio is the most expensive. SQL is the most expensive one. So be careful with that. But also sometimes they are instructed to install SQL Server Enterprise. And it's not always required. SQL Server Standard may be enough in the majority of cases, for the majority of the applications. SQL Server Enterprise is only required for mission-critical workloads with specific encryption and security and access to a lot of memory, because it can address more memory technical terms. Question that, and question that is as well with your clients, and I'll mention why. Then we have lightweight workloads that can be served with free SQL Express. Fortunately, it's not that often overlooked, so fine. On that regard, admins usually know when to deploy SQL Server Express, which is free of charge. Web workloads. SPLA is the only licensing program through which you still get SQL Server Web Edition, which is significantly cheaper than SQL Server Standard even. It may only be used for so-called public web workloads for websites, but why not? If the clients or you, for your own purposes, just need to run it for web workloads, then why would you pay for a full SQL Server? Kind of makes no sense. So review that. Reviewing editions is a necessary step. Another point. Yes.
If I can just jump into the edition topic. Can I get away if, again, I like going back to audits. Why? Because at the end of the day, that's the risk. The risk is audits. And still today, service providers are the number one audited community in the market. Still a fact of life. It's not going to change soon, but maybe it will one day. But that's just a fact of life. Have you seen cases where customers have been using SQL Server Enterprise and been reporting standard, and at the end of the audit process being provided a concession because they inadvertently installed Enterprise because some sysadmin, as you described through the installation process, inadvertently installed the wrong version, and they were billing their customers for standard. They weren't benefiting for it. What are your thoughts there? Can I get away with that? Maybe I don't need to optimize my enterprise. I can, again, risk versus reward. I can't hear you, Sasha. Is it just me on my side that maybe I've gone? I still can't hear you. Again, I don't know if it's me or you. If somebody's on the call, can you just quickly just drop a note if you can hear Sasha talking?
For some reason, Restream put me on mute. Apologies for that.
You back. You back. Okay.
Restream put me on mute unexpectedly. That's a multifaceted question. So auditors in an audit will not consider it. Auditors will not consider it. Auditors, when they see SQL Enterprise, you can't go back to them and say, dear EY, KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, can you please rename, consider these SQL servers to be standard because that's what we intended to deploy. And this is what we're billing the clients for. So your audit report, which goes to Microsoft, will still have SQL Server Enterprise with all the strings attached and massive debt if you didn't want to deploy standard, which happens all the time. But if you wanted to deploy standard, but somebody deployed SQL Enterprise, some admin that wasn't clearly instructed, which happens all the time in almost every infrastructure. I wouldn't say every. I wouldn't make a general claim here. Then it will be in the report. Can you then ask for an excuse from Microsoft to consider that as standard? And if you demonstrated to Microsoft that you actually build them for standard. So answering your question, Daryl, I've seen in over 100 audits, I have 2 cases when Microsoft was so nice that they considered it. But
I can assume evidence was provided to prove their case. It was not just goodwill.
It was not a goodwill, and it was not a win of the first round of negotiations. Okay. So you don't want to get into that situation when you have to prove yourself. So yeah, just look after editions. And I'm going to say this. Look after all the software on a regular basis. So this is not a moment in time cost optimization and that you need to perform. You need to make sure that somebody by mistake next month doesn't deploy a wrong edition. It's very important that on a monthly basis you look after what's deployed after you did, even before you did an optimization exercise, but especially after you did an optimization exercise, because things tend to degrade. Consolidated Windows Server, somebody added another host to the cluster. The way rules work in VMware, for example, when you use so-called host affinity, sorry, I can't avoid these terms, but if there are admins on the call, they will understand. So you need to then make sure that that host has all the necessary rules in this cluster, and that new deployed virtual machines, if that's per VM, have all the necessary rules. And I've seen that degrading, and an audit will uncover that. And you have to pay for it. And if you have an automated tool, and if you don't look after the costs, it will just produce you a report for the next month that will be a few times more expensive than the last month. And not necessarily, you won't necessarily notice that. You may just automatically pay for it. So look after that. Don't get into the situation when you've optimized your editions and then suddenly it all degrades next month. So another thing to consider about SQL, because we need to be conscious about time. Another thing to consider, or shall we take the questions that we have in our chat? And I kind of can think about who's hiding behind this name, but financially benefiting from an instance is not considered post-audit if you give it away for free, but still need to report correctly. That is a different situation. But as I said, it's a rare case when that was considered. It was considered in 2 cases, in over 100 audits. So we're talking about 1 to 2% cases. So if you do that, you won't automatically get a discount, even if you provide evidence. And Microsoft might consider a concession should the SPLA partner be able to prove that the database was not required benefit from enterprise features. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If you're able to prove that it did not benefit from enterprise features, then it may be considered. Again, 2% cases. Good comments. Thank you for them. Thank you for them very much. So going back to SQL. SQL Server Developer is a very interesting beast. There is no development discount. There are no development machines in SPLA. Everything must be reported as production. However, if an end client uses their virtual machine for their own development purposes, SQL Server Developer is a free edition that they may bring. So you, as a provider, you may not provide SQL Server Developer Edition. By no means, you may not. If you're providing SQL Server Developer, it will be counted as SQL Server Enterprise. If an end client wants to use it, you may tell them it's safe to do so. It's in the EULA. I'm not making this up. They may bring it. So if you're working with an end client on reducing their SPLA costs, you may want to do so. Then you can advise them to do that. You can advise them to deploy SQL Server Developer. Whether that's going to work for your internal workloads, like you are bringing your own SQL Server Developer as a client of your own infrastructure, that is a big question. Fortunately, we haven't seen it yet, so we didn't have to deal with it. And I'm not sure I want to find myself in that situation where we need to defend the client from that sort of usage. Segregate your internal use. Don't drop it on the same cloud platform. So granted, you won't be able to make a margin on hosting of that instance of SQL Server Enterprise from that client. Interestingly, however, in most of our conversations with service providers, that downgrade of SQL Server Enterprise to developer for the purpose of helping the end client is seen as a measure to improve end client relationships. It just, if you're after your end client relationships and not necessarily changing every single margin on every single license, then just consider that SQL Server Developer is free of charge. And feature-wise, it's like SQL Enterprise, but it must be used for development only, and you must have at least an email from an end client explaining that they deployed it and why they deployed it, and confirming in writing that that machine is only used for development. It's very important that you have all these little bits. What else can I say on SQL Server? SQL Server standard may be licensed per user. So if there are, I wouldn't say organizations because there may be massive clients, but if there are certain environments where the number of users is low, you may consider using SALs. It's very small saving. So it's not, you're not going to achieve like 30% cost reduction across all the SPLA. Yes, it's another option, I would put it this way. Why not? And we look after that. Tools like Octopus Cloud and SPLA Manager look after that as well. They would automatically suggest subscriber access licenses per user instead of a core license when it's more economically reasonable. Tiny savings. But since I now mentioned users, I want to talk about user licenses. So Microsoft SPLA has a draconian rule. It's a draconian rule. Every authorized user must have a license. What that means in practice is, if I can technically rent a virtual machine from a service provider, if I can log into a remote desktop on that server, remote server, and there's an instance of, say, Visual Studio, that provider must license me with an RDS license and the Visual Studio license, even if I never log in. I'm in a security group that allows me to log in. I never log in. A year, 2 years, 5 years, I still must have a license. And it's written black and white in the service provider use rights. So it's not an assumed rule. It's not something that you need to infer by reading universal license terms. No, it's just that. It just says so. Every user, regardless of their actual access. So it should be obvious that unless your end clients are happy to pay for granting access to everyone everywhere, and you are happy to do so in your own hosted solution, that managing security groups on a consistent basis is paramount. There is very rarely a need to have all domain users authorized to access every server. And there's absolutely zero reason to have disabled users in security groups, granting remote access. And you may ask me, why would I bother about disabled users? Because they're not technically authorized, because they're disabled. Disabled users contribute to massive problems with audit defense exercises. There's no reason to keep disabled users in security groups. Because if you get an audit, and I think I have a mock report somewhere from one of the previous lives, yes, this is what it looks like. It's a position per month, which is calculated based on the current data. It's extrapolated to the previous month. So if a user was disabled 2 months ago, it will be counted in the month preceding those 2 months. It will be counted, and it will increase your potential liability in an audit. if you want playing nicely with those licenses, it will increase your debt to Microsoft. So look after those security groups. Don't leave that rubbish inside the security groups. Tidy them up. As you tidy your physical premises, you have a cleaner coming every week to your data center, wiping the floors. Do the same to your Active Directory and security groups. Plus, as I mentioned, but I will mention it again, verify what software is installed and where. So many cases, too many, I would say, when there was supposed to be Office Standard, but somebody installed Office Professional Plus. It's not as bad as with SQL Server, but the cost of an Office Professional Plus license is twice the same. But again, think about audits. Your overpayment for Office Standard will not be considered, but you will have a debt on Office Professional Plus. Even so say you reported 100 standard licenses, you billed your clients for 100 standard licenses, but you consumed 100 Professional Plus licenses. So what you paid for standard will not automatically be considered. It, again, maybe if you prove your position, you don't want to get into that space. But also, if you have automated tools, and by design you wanted to deploy standard, and let's assume this: you deliver a service, say hosted SAP. This is a good example. Hosted SAP. SAP doesn't require Microsoft Access. It doesn't require Office Professional Plus. It only requires certain components of Microsoft Office Standard to, say, produce reports. So why would you, and usually those solutions are charged per client, regardless of what software is in those solutions. So why would you pay to Microsoft for Office Professional Plus when you could pay for Office Standard and save not a lot of money, $6 per user per month, but you can still save it. I think it's actually $12 per user per month difference. That's another cost optimization opportunity for you. Just be frugal with what software you use. Only install the necessary components. And by the way, not many know that if only Excel is required, there's a separate SKU that is not on the public price list, but ask your SPLA reseller. There's a separate SKU for Excel. There's a separate SKU for Word. You have to install them as Word, not as Office, as Word, as Excel. So you can save money on that as well. So look after your software, be frugal about the editions you deploy, and tidy up, use the security groups on a regular basis. Don't let your admins fix the problems by dropping all the domain users into the security groups temporarily. They will never get deleted. They will remain there forever. So yeah, every single time in over 20 years of IT, I still want to see a case when an infrastructure is pristine and as expected. So, but Daryl, I want to go back to the question I mentioned at the very beginning, and I promised to go back to this. So this is the question. So why should we care about reducing SPLA costs? How can we just measure it as it should be and just bill it to our end clients as they use it? You know, they deploy wrong editions. Maybe we deployed wrong edition, but nobody noticed. Why don't we just make margin on this software instead of actually reducing our own business opportunity on reselling this software? Why deprive ourselves? What's your take on that?
I have yet to come across. Well, let me be very cautious. I hardly ever come across a provider that accurately knows what's actually installed and what they should be reporting back to Microsoft. And to bill your customers accurately, you have to know exactly what you have installed. So it's really extreme to find a service provider that is managing their environment in a compliant manner. And if you're not managing your environment and you do not have full control and visibility, you can't really charge or bill your customers even for the higher margin of what you should be. That's one. Two is that there's so much competition out there that if you incorrectly bill your customers or not incorrectly, if you build them for the higher margin products that they shouldn't be charged for, ultimately they will go to a competitor and you'll lose the business. Third reasoning is that ultimately you are in business for the long run. And to be in business for the long run, you need to make sure that you feed the Microsoft beast what you owe them. They deserve the money, okay? And that beast needs to be fed. You don't feed him or don't feed it, you'll be audited. It's a simple fact of life. It's just how it works. And then if you get audited and you found out of compliance, you can't go back to your end customer and request them to pay for your mistakes. So it's a net loss potentially. So, and on premise, old school, non sexy licensing is still there. So, we might not like it. Our customers might not like it. Everybody's moving on to the next great thing. Fantastic. We're also moving to AI based licensing,
Hmm.
agents, Copilot, everything, Azure. We there as a company. But we've got a responsibility to a very large customer base of ours that's still making a lot of money and have got a very good business. And we want to make sure they have a good business for many years to come on prem. So it's not sexy. It's not fun anymore. The knowledge is actually declining. That's out there, but still huge risk, and you've got a business responsibility at the end of the day.
I want to close. We don't have enough time for a long story here, but I want to close with something else. There are opportunities for cost optimization that are provided by the SPLA agreement. And I probably won't go through, you have a discount for 20 admins. You don't have to pay for demos and evaluations as long as you properly document them. You can read that in your SPLA agreement. I want to mention disaster recovery, because disaster recovery is something that is misunderstood, sometimes incorrectly used. But I'll just give you one example. A few months ago, we reviewed an infrastructure where there was already a disaster recovery environment, but it wasn't just used exactly per the rules of SPLA. And just in case provider paid for it. So they're not non-compliant. They're completely compliant. We looked at them and asked them all the necessary questions, kind of clarified the usage models. And then we said, do you know how much you can save per year if you just do these tweaks in the existing infrastructure? So no massive change required. It was over $1 million per year. 7 figures just by aligning with Microsoft's rules. So don't neglect that. Reread your SPLA agreement. See what else you can benefit from. Look at disaster recovery. Look at those 20 admins. You have 5 data centers. You can discount 100 admins. If you're a large company, that could be a massive saving. It's not automatic. You can't just discount admins. You must follow the rules. Here's an opportunity. It's in SPLA. Surprise, surprise. Microsoft gave you ways not to overpay. They want their money, but they also give you concessions on obvious things that you need to do your business. So on this note, I think the bottom line, unless we have any more questions, the bottom line is segregate, consolidate, look after your additions. It's possible to save up to 30, sometimes more % of SPLA costs, which you don't necessarily have to completely drop from your margins. But if, for example, being more competitive is a question for you, then you can reduce your cost to the end clients and become more competitive. It's up to you what you do with your bottom line. SPLA is not an unavoidable expense. If you're ready to roll up your sleeves, if you follow these recipes, if you don't understand how to do it completely, talk to us. You know where to find us. You can certainly reduce the cost. It's not an immovable target.
Thank you, Sasha, for that. It's been a great I always enjoy our conversations and the knowledge that's shared. I want to just leave everyone with one last note. Actually, it's not connected to SPLA. It's just on a personal note to our community. One, we're not AI avatars. As you can see, we're still real people. It's getting confusing these days. So it's really important to point that out. The reason that I'm also pointing it out, and this is for our community, that we're seeing our competitors actually copy our intellectual property and then add it to AI avatars on their website. So we are seeing it more and more often. It's actually frightening. Um, Competitors that have no clue about Microsoft licensing or SPLA licensing in other areas of this business that just put an avatar of themselves out there and just copy our IP and just feed it into it. So we are the original still, and we're still flesh and blood, and we're still around.
Gangsters.
Uh, yeah. So it's a message I'm going to be pushing actually on every webinar going forward, because AI is not everything, and intellectual property and know-how and knowledge is still something to look out for. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sasha.
Thank you, Zara, for that. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and your notes. This was a very good note. AI requires compute, and cloud providers are readily awaiting for more subscription cycles to accommodate this.
Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more. Seem
Thanks.
to forget the possibilities of what they can continue to do on premise. Well, I would add one single thing before we close the live. Don't forget about Europe and European data residency concerns. So this licensing is still with us. And as I said, I repeat myself, it's not an immovable target. It's totally optimizable. So on this note, have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.